Journal entry 9. Today another prisoner spoke to me. First he asked about my injuries, which weren't deep enough to be fatal but absolutely throbbed, while the now just trickling blood stained my already disgustingly dirty pajamas. The guy's cell was across from mine, so we could see each other through the bars. His name was Liam. I asked him how long he'd been here, but he didn't know for sure. But longer than me. I told him how I ended up here, and then I said, "What about you?" He hesitated for a moment, and then he told me his story, which I'll paraphrase here. Liam went on an early morning bike ride with a few friends. Before any of them really knew what had happened, a horde of Squatch crept out from behind the trees. It was still dark out and they were holding their primitive torches high. Probably just like the ones who'd taken me from the burbs. He told me they tried to ride ahead of them, but those motherfuckers were too fast. They were overtaken and Liam watched as his friends' limbs ripped from their bodies. He said he heard every scream. Each last blood-choked, rattling breath stutter out from their mutilated bodies. Several Squatch held down one of his friends, and the flesh from his friend's soon-to-be armless and legless torso. Until the screams stopped and only a pulpy bundle of gore remained. After that, he watched as the Squatch slurped on their bones. Liam thought they were doing it to clean them or something. Then they just collected and carried them farther down the path. Liam said he was then dragged off to a bigger pile of bones. He didn't know who these remains belonged to. And then the Squatch came together in a large group of 50 strong. They seemed to appear from nowhere, slinking out of the dark ravine around the bike path. Each one took a turn grabbing the pile of bones that Liam's friends had been added to. The creatures worked together to use some of the bones to erect little huts along the pathway, stringing them together with ropes that seemed to be made of hair and sinew. They also built statues. Statues that he said were weird and nonsensical. Then, Liam started talking about the figurine that the Squatch gave me. He told me I shouldn't be holding on to it. That it wasn't good for me. Journal entry 10. It's been a while since I last wrote. The Squatch have been returning each day to bring me to the testing room. But I finally figured out what to do. When they brought me to the room the second time, they made sure I was holding it. Through its touch alone, the injuries in my leg stopped aching. As I held it closer, the pain in my shoulder vanished as well. I stared at the little figurines on the floor once again. They made sense now. All but one of them represented something man-made. The statue that looked more like them was the key. I reached out again, but this time, I did the right thing. I crushed them all. All but one in the shape of a Squatch. And a sickening, beautiful thing happened. My captors clapped. I hold my figurine close to my heart at night, after Liam has gone to sleep. It's the only thing that makes the hurting stop. Journal entry 11. Hello, journal. It's been a while again. I've been talking to Liam each day, between my sessions with the creatures. But we've also been speaking with someone else. Someone I didn't think I'd ever hear from again. An impossible coincidence. It was Alexandra, my friend's ex. Hadn't that one troll told me she'd be dead by now? What had that guy's username even been? I couldn't recall it at the time and had to look it up in my journal. The Bad Timeline. Alexandra confirmed that the Bad Timeline was her asshole cousin. She said he was this big conspiracy theorist. Or big on the internet, anyway. Journal entry 12. Liam, Alexandra, and I were becoming close. Or I suspect that's what it would feel like. But I've been holding the figurine more and more. And I feel like I'm somehow distanced from them. Yesterday afternoon, they both caught me with it and told me to give it up. Alexandra confessed that they'd given her one too, but that she buried it on the first day. Buried it so deep that she sprained her wrist in the process. And that's when she told us the story of how she came to be here. She'd been hiding out in the woods alongside a few other survivors from the city, and 2 members of their group were missing, a woman and her adult son. She said they'd been working at the big library off 3rd Street together. Alexandra's group had gathered at the edge of the southernmost woods just outside town, a fair distance from where my suburb was. They'd crouched in the scrub brush along the main highway, staying out of sight, trying to find their missing people. Then, closer into the city, the remaining survivors spotted an enormous structure. The previous buildings surrounding it had all been destroyed, and there was fire everywhere. Another statue, but not like the ones the Squatch had been previously building. This one was different, incomprehensibly tall, also crafted of the bones and tallow of slaughtered human beings, family, friends, all murdered in the service of this thing that Alexandra had seen. She paused in her story and nodded towards my figurine. It looked a lot like that. Journal entry 13. Everything just blends together. A smudged finger painting of what can't be reality, but is. Liam, Alexandra, and I keep talking, and they keep telling me to let the figurine go, to break it, to bury it, to get rid of it. But every time they've told me that, I've just wanted to cry. Last night, we stayed up and talked longer than usual. And by the end of the night, my mouth had fallen open. The words were right there, but the only thing that escaped my lips was a soft, crackling gasp. Though they watch me nervously, especially as I'm taken away to the big room each day, Alexandra and Liam refuse to stop talking to me. And I'm glad. They tell me it's not too late. My hands aren't what they should be. Not entirely human. If I dropped the figurine now, I'd have nothing. Worse, there'd be no one like me. And what if Alexandra and Liam were wrong, and it was really too late? What if this is the new normal? Even if we all somehow escaped, found another group of survivors, fought back against the Squatch, how would I fit in? No human being would ever truly trust me again. Not now, anyway. It's never too late to change your mind, Alexandra once said when I told her I couldn't give up the figurine. As I write this, the figurine is still clutched in one of my hands. Ugly hands. Hands I don't recognize anymore. Journal entry 15. I keep changing. I think that this will be my last entry. Before I bury this book for the final time, I need to write down everything that's happened. Here's my confession. At some point in the spring, when it was very, very dark outside, the Squatch came to snatch me and Liam. Alexandra spat absolute venom at them, screaming and trying to claw her way through the bars. I know she didn't like that we were both being taken at the same time. Didn't like how the morbid procession of Squatch had bedazzled themselves with bracelets made from every shade of human hair. Didn't like that her only friends were being stolen from her. I heard what might have been the sounds of her fingertips cracking as she scrabbled, sobbing, "Bring them back!" I haven't seen Alexandra since. They dragged us along the hallway like ragdolls. I was hopeful. I thought maybe they were going to bring us both to the big room. But then, that didn't explain why they were wearing their unusual jewelry, or why there were so many of them present. Still, I remained hopeful. Just a little while longer. That hope shattered when we were dragged right by the doorway that led to the big room. I glanced at Liam, and he stared back. Neither of us knew what was going to happen to us. Some form of torture? Were they finally going to kill us? Eat us alive? Add our remains to one of their bone-sculpted towers? Liam and I were hurried roughly through the woods and the desolate, pillaged suburbs until we finally reached the south end of the city and a towering, oozing construct that I instantly recognized as the one Alexandra had described. It'd been built in a false clearing, forged in the wake of the surrounding destruction, and a grinning mass of Squatch flooded the ruins. Fans in a packed stadium. Liam stared ahead. I forced myself to ignore the itch in my wrists and the peculiar aching in my bones, and traced Liam's line of sight. Of course, he was staring at the bone construct, statue, effigy, whatever it was meant to be. But his gaze drew lower, affixed to 5 spikes, the shade of ivory, jutting out of what once would have been the front entry to the old city nature center. It was clear the creatures had delighted in its annihilation as they made room for their sculpture, their idol. I felt strange, nauseating iciness looking at those 5 spikes. They protruded almost horizontally, like outstretched arms, patterned in the shape of a crucified human being. It was at that exact moment, while Liam stared at the spikes with confusion, that I knew precisely how this was going to go down. The crowds cheered around us, sounding their familiar whooping bellow. I stared at the heartless construct before us and grasped my figurine, trying to find familiar faces among the Squatch. Liam's face was starting to look less and less human to me, less and less important. I thought about how close this crowd below were to each other, how some of them might even be my friends and family. Because, hey, maybe they survived. Maybe they just had to go through a period of itching, white bristles and aching, lengthening bones. Just an awkward phase before learning the truth, right? The Squatch, the people all around, were waiting for me to make a choice. I knelt of my own accord, and the community crooned with encouragement. My hands were around Liam's neck. It took me a few seconds to even notice. I lifted him, easily, with a single newly clawed hand. And wow, how that crowd, my crowd, cheered. They were thunderously loud. It was so wonderful. Liam looked directly at me no longer captivated by the statue at all. "You can still stop," he said, heavily, between wet breaths. Maybe I only imagined he said that. It was hard to tell. I skewered each of his limbs, one by one, on those sacrificial bones. First, I impaled his left hand. It squelched in an unseemly way. Then I targeted his right. Once he was pinned above, a beetle specimen in a frame, I pressed his feet onto the lower spikes, hearing the bones scrape against bone. There are a whole lot of tiny blood vessels in the feet, and Liam's spurted his lifeblood onto me. In the dark, it all looked like nothing but oily sludge, smearing and staining me. So I lifted his head and slapped each cheek before his eyes could fully close. And I waited for him to say something that could fix all of this, that could change things. But he just stared at me and said once more, "It's not too late." And maybe I imagined that too. I impaled his neck on the final bone shard, but I took my time. It was situated almost at the base of his skull, and the crackly chorus of a spinal column breaking came both after and in tandem with Liam's thick, bubbling gasps as he choked on his own blood. But someone nearby placed a torch in my right hand and wrapped a set of beautiful claws gently around my own. There wasn't much time to think as I lit Liam's body on fire, scorching the bones both inside and around him. And my head was swarmed with his blaring cries. My violence had paralyzed him, but he still had a voice, I think. I wasn't sure if I had a voice anymore, if that even mattered. I watched his eyes blacken and crackle wetly, like popping embers in a fire. His skin bubbled and disintegrated. His limbs attempted to curl in on themselves, only to be cradled in place by each cruel spike. And the whole time, the crowd cheered.
I often wonder where this person is now. Maybe one of my captors. I'll be forced into the same conversion program soon, and will see that big room. That, or be sacrificed to the evil that ravages this world. Because in my own time, I have learned that there's no end to a hunger this monstrous. But I have this journal, and there are plenty of empty pages left in it for me. The Squatch gave me a figurine and I broke it and buried it deep. There are others who've gone before me that I can thank for that. And I have you reading these words. Thank you for that. Heavy footsteps are approaching, so it's goodbye for now, or forever. I hope that you've survived this strange world. I hope that you hold on to yourselves and stay together. And if you haven't always done that, well, just remember, you can still stop. It's never too late.